Hey Chumbas, how's it going? JonJonTheWise here, and I got another Cyberpunk video for you guys. Today we're going to continue our series and talking about skills. This is part 3 in the series, so make sure you guys check out part 1 and part 2 if you want more information on the skills in Cyberpunk Red. But before we get into that, make sure you guys join our Discord community. The link is in the description below. It's a community of Cyberpunk fans, but we also love other tabletop games, so feel free to join us. Also, make sure you're subscribed to my podcast, Tabletop Cyberpunk, where I post some of my videos in audio form, and I also have cool interviews. Make sure you guys follow me on social media at JonJonTheWise, where you can find me on all social media platforms, where we can connect, and you can get updates about what I'm doing in the Cyberpunk world. And last but not least, if you guys really want to support me, patreon.com/JonJonTheWise is the best place to do that. You can directly help out this channel in all of its endeavors, and I greatly appreciate all the love and support I get from the community and my patrons. If you can't afford to give on Patreon, liking, subscribing, commenting all helps with the algorithm, so I greatly appreciate that as well. But let's get into the video. All right, last time where we left off, the next skill is Deduction. Deduction is an intelligence skill, and it is one of the skills that I use most often, especially when the players need that extra bit of information. I'll give you guys an example. Let's say you guys are at a crime scene and there's all kinds of evidence there, but the players really just can't pinpoint any kind of clue that they can follow. They're looking for a path to try to find a solution. Well, you can have them roll for deduction, and depending on how great their result is, on a degree of success or degree of failure, you can give them information, such as you can tell by the scratch marks on the walls and the victim's wounds that the attacker is right-handed, and that the right hand was superhuman, so they must have some kind of cyber arm. Now, unlike concentration, which makes you remember things that have happened in your past, deduction helps you put clues together to come to a conclusion. You can look at the world around you, look at the things that you can see, touch, feel, and those are the things that you can put together to come up with a conclusion. As a game master, I would use this sparingly. It's not something that I would automatically have my players do, because it's always more fun when your players can figure out things on their own without having to roll dice. But it is a great way to give them a little bit of information to set them on the right path, not enough to spoil everything and not enough for it to be a complete gimme, but giving a little bit of information for them to maybe put some other clues together in their own mind and be able to find the solution to the problem. All right, next up we have Education. It is also an intelligence skill. Education is really self-explanatory. It's the general knowledge of things around you. Education is a great skill for wanting to figure out some kind of information about the world around the player. I always tell my players that your character may be smarter than you as a human being, because let's say I play a medtech who's a doctor in Cyberpunk. Well, I'm clearly not a doctor, so my character knows more about the medical field than I do. In that case, it is appropriate for my character to roll an intelligence, an education, to try to remember some kind of general knowledge that they knew from their schooling days or from some kind of experience that they had. All right, next up we have Gamble. Gamble is an intelligence skill. It's pretty self-explanatory. It's playing the game of making money, putting down stakes and making something in return. So there is a skill to gambling. As much as it is a luck game, the odds are stacked against the player, but there are techniques and skills out there that can help you in gambling. And I think that this is why the skill is here in the game. All right, next up is language. In this, you must choose a specific language whenever you increase this skill. This is a really great way to add a narrative focus to your character. I know that a lot of people might not want to put a lot of points into something like this, but if you're in a situation where you're dealing with the Russian mob or Chinese gangers and you got to speak their language to be able to navigate their world, that's something that your character can do that the other characters cannot. And like I said, it's a great way to narratively give your character a focus. Next up, we have library search, another intelligence skill. Library search is a very commonly used skill in my campaigns because it is the way that you Google things or look up databases, basically. If your netrunner or any of your other folks want to try to look over something in a database or a system, or even through their agent, library search is the way to do it. It's looking through a database of information, whether it's books or agents, as I said, and trying to extract information from that database. The lower you roll, the less likely you are to find any good information. The higher you roll, the more likely you are to find the exact information that you need. As I said, this is a very commonly used skill in my campaigns because my players are always trying to get some kind of information to move the plot. And if they have access to some sort of database on hand, a library search roll can really make or break the campaign. All right, next up, local expert. It says here in bold, you must choose a specific location whenever you increase this skill, which cannot be any larger than a single neighborhood or community. Now, local expert is another common skill that I use in my campaign, and I'm not sure if other game masters do, but this has come up many times. Now, there is another skill called Streetwise, and Streetwise and local expert, I admit, has a lot of overlap in situations because if you are an expert of the local area, the local crime and justice and politicians and etc., then you might also be Streetwise. So there's a way where you can use two skills interchangeably. There are times where I told them you can either roll a Streetwise or a local expert. Each test will yield different results, but it will give you information regardless. What I usually like to do is make sure that my players take local expert for the local area in our campaign. For example, in my campaign, we're playing in Texas, a place called the Devil's Triangle, which is a pretty large area. It has a bunch of cities within it. So being a local expert of the Devil's Triangle is very important in our campaign. If you want to know information about fixers, you want to know information about local politics, local expert is the way to do it. Also, if you want to find information on where the nearest gas station is, where you can sell your fenced goods, these are all things that local expert can help you in. Now, why wouldn't I use Streetwise instead? Well, Streetwise can give you even deeper information into the criminal world. Knowing the fence and where you can sell it is one thing, but knowing how you can do business with that fence is a completely different subject, and that's where Streetwise comes in more importantly than the local expert. All right, next up we have science. Science, an area of study must be specified whenever the skill is increased. Possible options include geology, mathematics, physics, zoology, anthropology, biology, chemistry, and history. This is a little bit self-explanatory. It's not something that has come up much in my campaigns, but like I said, it is a narratively focused skill. For example, if your character is an archaeologist, then taking a couple points in this is probably best. As a game master, I might even give some extra points to that character because, like I said, this isn't going to make or break the campaign. This is just going to add a narrative focus. So I might give a couple extra points and put that science to a 4 for the exact subject that the character knows about. So, for example, they might have a science of a 2, and they can do general science checks, much like the education skill. But if it has to do with archaeology or anthropology, let's say, if that's their expertise, then they have a 4 in that skill. So that's a little bit of homebrew. Obviously, that's not rules as written. But when it comes to these supporting skills like science, I like to mix and match around to make them work for my campaign. All right, next up we have tactics, another intelligence skill. It is the skill of managing large-scale battles effectively and efficiently. So from what I can tell from the description of this skill, it is mostly supposed to be focused on a larger scale. Like you're a commander of an army, you're going to war, and you're making sure all your guys can do the things that they need to do to win the battle. But in my campaigns, the way that I've used it is more on a micro level. For example, you might be in a combat situation and the leader of the booster gang in that combat round rolls for tactics to try to figure out who the weakest one of your group is or the best way to flank everybody. And I might even give everybody on the enemy team a +1 because of a successful tactics check, +1 to hit, because of a successful tactics check from the commander of the booster gang. So tactics can be very important if you want to save yourself, if you want that cutting edge to win a battle. And even though the beginning of the skill says it is focused on large scale battles, the second sentence says a character with this skill usually knows what must be done to direct a battle and how an enemy force may react. It's anticipating your enemy before they do the thing that they're going to do. That's what makes tactics so important. So while it is a not much used skill in my campaigns, I think it's a missed opportunity by my players to be able to do something cool. And that's why I have the bad guys use it. So it gives them the idea that, oh, hey, maybe we can do something like this as well. All right, next up we have Wilderness Survival, another intelligence skill. This is a little bit self-explanatory. If you ever played Dungeons and Dragons, I think we all know exactly what this is. But for those of you that do not understand it, it's the knowledge of setting traps, foraging for wood, tracking game, building shelters, and making fires. It's basically what you would do outside of a city to survive and to be able to trek the unknown areas out there. Now, I haven't used it much in my campaign, even though my campaign does take place in an area where there's a lot of outdoor wilderness. I call it wilderness and weirdos. If you guys watch Under the Crimson Sky, I've said that a million times. But I still have not seen it used much because my players, I don't think, have a lot of points in wilderness survival, if any. And instead, they use that information of not knowing to make better judgments. So what I'm trying to say is, because they don't know anything about the wilderness, they mostly try to avoid it because they know how treacherous it can be when you are unskilled in a place like that. All right, now we're going to be moving on to fighting skills. In this section, we're probably just going to move past things really quickly. The first one is Brawling. Brawling is a dexterity. It is the skill at fighting and grappling with brute strength. This is a very important skill if you're going to be grappling in Cyberpunk Red. For you to be able to grab your enemy, it is going to be your brawling versus the enemy's brawling, and the winner wins the grapple. It is also how you do unarmed strikes if you're not skilled in martial arts. So if you're planning on using a human shield or escaping a captor's grasp, then you're going to want to put some points in brawling, or else you're going to find yourself being gripped by a stronger opponent, a more skilled opponent, and your cool solo is all of a sudden basically obsolete. Evasion. Evasion is a dexterity skill. This is one of the most important skills in the game. When character creation is going on, I make sure to tell all my players, make sure you put at least 4 points into evasion, because that is how you dodge melee attacks, unarmed attacks, not grappling, remember that's brawling, but anything that has to do with unarmed strikes, you're going to be dodging with evasion. And if you have a reflex 8 or higher, you can dodge ranged attacks and explosions. So you can see how important evasion can be to dodge damage. Next up, we have martial arts. It's a ×2 dexterity skill. You can learn multiple forms, but you must do so separately. Possible options are karate, taekwondo, judo, and aikido. Each one of these martial arts has their own special ability. It has like some kind of prerequisites, like you got to move certain spaces, and then you got to do something like that to do like a flying kick. So make sure you guys look at the martial arts section of the book to determine which one you want. Now, what makes martial arts a ×2 skill isn't just the special ability. It is the fact that your concealable hands and feet, which, you know, you can walk into a nightclub with these. They might tell you to put your AR on the table, but you can walk in with these hands and feet. They can ignore half armor. Brawling doesn't ignore half armor. Armor absorbs the blow. But with martial arts, you find the pressure points and weakness in people's armor, and you can do devastating strikes to them. It's a very important skill, and it's a very narrative skill. If you're going to be taking a Kung Fu fighting champion in your Cyberpunk Red game, I would look over the martial arts section very closely because it can be really powerful. All right, last but not least, in the fighting area, we have melee weapon. It's also a dexterity skill. This is pretty simple. It's any kind of melee weapon, whether it's slices, bashes, or whatever it may be. If it's in your hand and it's not a gun and it's hitting somebody, then it is a melee weapon. This is important if you're going to be using katanas, batons, etc. It's pretty self-explanatory when it comes to that. All right, let's move on to performance skills. The first one up is acting. Acting is a cool skill. This is the skill of assuming a role, disguising yourself as someone else, whether real or fictitious, and faking emotions and moods. Now, in my experience, this skill has had some kind of conflicts with persuasion. So what makes acting different than persuasion? Persuasion does not necessarily have to be rooted in a lie or a deception, where acting actually is rooted in some kind of deception. You know, whether we all know it's a deception or not, you're pretending to be somebody that you're not when you're acting. But when you're persuading, you're not necessarily having to lie. You could be persuading with facts and acting as yourself and not as a different person. But when you're acting, you're putting on a different role. You're acting as someone that belongs in the place that you're supposed to be, like a security guard in a corporate prison, or you're some kind of booster ganger that is in a booster ganger hideout, and you're not supposed to be there, but you're playing the part. This is all where acting comes along, and that will get you in the door. But if somebody comes up to you and they challenge you, you may have to persuade them that they're wrong about whatever doubts they have about you. Next up, we have play instrument is an empathy skill instead of a technical skill. You can choose which instrument when you increase the skill. Possible options include singing, guitar, drums, violin, piano, etc. This is another narrative skill. I haven't seen it used many times in my campaign, and I have 2 rocker boys in one of my games. This is just one of those things that it adds a fun flavor to the game. When the players do use play instrument, what they usually do is it just gives them a little bit of an edge in a social situation. Let's say you're in a group of people, they're all hanging around and they're trying to figure out whether you're friend or foe. You bust out your guitar, you play a couple tunes, and they soften up to you. And that's basically what play instrument can do. Also, it can help you gain a reputation as a rocker boy, because let's say you have a gig, you play your instrument, and according to your performance, that's how people will remember you by. Okay, we're going to be moving on now to ranged weapon skills. These are pretty simple. Each one of them is dependent on what kind of ranged weapon you want to use. For example, archery, these are all reflex skills. Archery is for bows and arrows, crossbows. You have auto fire, which is a ×2 skill. This is a skill used for automatic fire. That's where you can do the 2d6 ×4 damage with an assault rifle, and 2 6s are critical injury. It's crazy amounts of damage. But you also need auto fire for suppressing an area, doing suppressive fire in an area to make sure that your buddies can run to cover and the enemy doesn't charge at them. And then we have stuff like handgun, self-explanatory, heavy weapon. This is really important if you ever want to use grenade launchers or flamethrowers or missile launchers or any of those crazy things that your game master gives you. You're going to want to have a heavy weapons. Shoulder arms is another self-explanatory skill. It is used for ARs, for rifles of a variety. So if you're going to be using those kinds of weapons, you definitely want to take some in shoulder arms. Okay, now we're going to be moving on to social skills, some of the most important skills in Cyberpunk Red. I'm looking at these right now, and I'm telling you, we've used a lot of these all the time. The first one on the list is bribery. It is a cool skill. It is the skill of knowing when to bribe someone, how to approach them, and how much to offer. Knowing when to bribe somebody is really important. If you just go up to cops and offer bribes to them, that's completely illegal. They'll take you to jail. And that's something that you do not want to do. But if you know who can be greased, that is really important information that you just do not want to pass up. So make sure that you put some points in bribery if you plan on doing it. Now, has it come up in my campaign much? Not really. It usually has not come up because my players would instead persuade or act or deceive, and then the enemy would roll a human perception, and from there on, they would try to get the things that they need to. Bribery works sometimes. Whether you have the skill or not, I mean, hey, if I give you 1,000 eddies to do something that you normally wouldn't do, maybe bribery has nothing to do with it. You know what I mean? Let's say you want to get into a nightclub that isn't like some kind of crazy nightclub, but you're not on the waiting list. Offering the bouncer 500 eddies is more than he probably makes in his entire shift. So rolling on it is, I think, unnecessary, to be honest with you. I would just have the NPC take the money and let them in if he didn't have any reason not to. Next up on the skill is conversation. It is an empathy skill. It is the skill of extracting information from people without alerting them through careful conversation. So the way I've used it in my campaigns is basically if a character wants to just talk to an NPC that otherwise doesn't really care to talk to them. For example, it might just be someone on the street minding their own business, but the players know they're an important person that has important information. Just walking up to them and persuading them and acting and doing all these skills is going to turn them off completely. You got to soften them up a little bit. You got to converse with them. You got to make it seem like you're not trying to get something out of them, that you're just sparking a conversation. And rolling on conversation determines whether they are interesting enough to this person or the topics are interesting enough to this person where they might divulge some more information. Next up, we have human perception. It's an empathy skill, a very, very important skill in Cyberpunk Red. It is the skill used to determine if people are lying or if people are deceiving you in some sort of way. As a player, you absolutely need it, and NPCs will be using this against you as well. It is one of the top skills in Cyberpunk Red, up there with Evasion, especially because Cyberpunk Red is such a social game. You're going to want to have something like that on hand. Interrogation is a cool skill. It is a skill of forcibly extracting information from people. It is a not much used skill if you're a lawman or somebody that is going to be talking to people to extract information from them. There are obviously interrogation techniques that people use to psychologically get the person to give up some information. So it's great if your character or your players or NPCs are focused on that aspect to have some points in interrogation where they can battle against each other to try to extract some information. Next up on the list, we have persuasion. Persuasion is a cool skill. It is another one of those skills that is always going to be used. There's nothing better than trying to persuade an NPC to change and lying to them. That's all part of persuasion. So make sure that you take this skill, make sure that you prioritize it. It is very important in the social aspect of Cyberpunk Red to get the things that you want. Next up, we have personal grooming. It is a cool skill. Now, this is one of those skills that I use every now and then, especially when my players are going out about town. They're going to be in a social area. How well do they personally groom themselves? It's actually had hilarious results. One of my players like rolled a 1 and then a 10. So like his result was like a -2. And it led to some really cool interactions with NPCs where he was like, I think I just got to leave because I smell and everybody's acting like I smell and I'm disheveled and I just don't belong here. I'm blowing our cover. Like NPCs would be like, oh, what is that smell? You know, it just led some really hilarious interactions that were actually really significant for moving the plot along and interacting in social areas. So as I said, it's not a commonly used thing. It's not one of those things that you want to put a 10 in, but it is definitely a skill that you want to keep in mind if you're going to be in social areas a lot of times. Next up, we have Streetwise. Streetwise is a cool skill. Now, Streetwise is also a very important skill if you want to know information about the criminal world in your campaign. If you want to know how fixers operate, what they need to be able to do business with you, what their motives are, etc. These are all important information that you need for your character if you're going to be living in the criminal world of Cyberpunk Red. It's also a great way to avoid bad situations, as it says. It's avoiding bad situations in bad neighborhoods. You just know your spidey senses tingle when you're in a bad area, and having Streetwise will give you the information you need if you need to get out of there or if you're really not in danger. Next up, we have trading. Trading is another cool skill. It's the skill of striking a good bargain with a merchant or customer. unlike haggle, which is a operator rank thing, trading is just a general skill that players can use if they want to offer something and gain something in return. Now, haggling can lower the price for operators. That's what makes them special. But trading is something that gives you information on whether you have a valuable item in your possession and what kind of valuable item you can get in return for it. It's not an ultra common skill. I've seen even fixers take it because you're going to need trading, and you can add your operator rank to it, at least in my games. I believe that's rules as written. Don't quote me on it. But I've seen a lot of fixers take it because it's really important to be able to know the value of an item and what you can get in return. All right, next up we have wardrobe and style, another cool skill. Much like personal grooming, I use it the same way. In fact, I have my players roll both of them at once, and personal grooming determines how well they're put together, how they smell, and wardrobe and style determines how they look aesthetically, whether they're within fashion or not. A lot of hilarious ways that I use this is I tell my players, tell me what you're wearing before you roll, because you can hilariously, they'll say like, oh, I'm wearing a potato sack, let's say, and then they roll like a 34 as a result. And then everywhere they go, people are like, oh my God, so avant-garde, so different, so edgy. It's not like the style over substance that we see normally. This is vapor tech or casual tech, all kinds of stuff like that. So there you can get a lot of really cool, fun results with wardrobe and style. It's obviously not one of those skills, once again, that you want to put 10 in, but it's something to keep in mind to add some flavor to social situations as a game master. All right, guys, thank you so much for joining me on this one. We're going to have a part 4 to finish up the skills. Next up, we're going to be talking about technical skills, so all my techs out there, stay tuned for that. I hope this information helped you guys. If you have any other suggestions or comments on how you use your skills, make sure you leave it down in the comments so we can all learn from you. All right, other than that, have a wonderful day. I'll see you Chumbas on the next one, and happy gaming. Bye.